The Hunger Games, Percy Jackson, Twilight. These are just some of the many book series that started as one length and later kept going. From standalones to duologies to trilogies, and long series with added prequels, perspectives, or spin-offs. These book series seemingly never end. So my question to you is this a good thing or a bad thing? But don't answer yet, because we're going to explore the ins and outs of this all too common bookish phenomenon, and by the end of this video, you can make up your mind one way or the other. Starting with the book that got me thinking about all this in the first place, Somewhere Beyond the Sea by T.J. Klune. This book's Goodreads page says it's the hugely anticipated sequel to T.J. Klune's The House in the Cerulean Sea. So let's talk about that. Now let me just say that I loved The House in the Cerulean Sea, and in general I loved T.J. Klune's work. So I'm of course going to read this, but it lends itself perfectly to exploring the topic of this video. The House in the Cerulean Sea released in 2020. It's a stunningly beautiful and emotional cozy fantasy read. It's one of those books that are perfectly wrapped up in a sweet little package. You want more from the characters because you love them, but you understand that more doesn't always equal better. Nevertheless, the ending is satisfying and you know it's a standalone, so you accept that and move on. And just to solidify this, you ask the author himself if there will be more, and he says he doesn't think it's on the cards while strategically leaving his answers open. You know, just in case. I'll read one particular answer to you just so we can get some context. At this point, it's only a standalone. That's one thing I wanted to make sure when I signed this specific contract with Tor, that the 3 adult books I'd given them would all be one-offs. Again, he ends this by keeping it open. Then, 3 years later, the author and the publisher announce a sequel. A sequel to a standalone, you say? Well, alright, now here's the thing. I'm looking forward to reading this, obviously. I bought it. In fact, it came out today, so I got it on Kindle. But what happened here? Why did a book start as a standalone and 4 years later turn into a duology, and who knows beyond that? And can a book really be called a hugely anticipated sequel if nobody anticipated it? Now, the only place I could find TJ talking about why he wrote the sequel was in an interview with Big Gay Fiction podcast. It's a great listen, so I'll leave a link in the description if you want to give it a go. In this interview, he tells us the ethos behind why he wrote a sequel, but nothing more. He tells us the meaning behind it, what gave him the inspiration to write it, but not more than that. As an aside, his ethos, his inspiration, made me even more excited to read the book. So if you want to find out what that is, listen to the interview. Then, later in the interview, he says this.
Can y'all keep a secret? I have one more idea in mind for The House in the Cerulean Sea. This story, it probably won't happen for a few more years because I did 2020, House in the Cerulean Sea, 2024, the sequel comes out, so maybe 2028. We'll see it. 8 years into the future. What happens when Lucy takes the center stage and tells his own story? So we may end this with a trilogy capper.
Not only do we have a standalone turning into a duology, but it's likely going to be a trilogy instead, especially as he goes on to say that he's already written 30,000 words of it. T.J. Klune is a prolific author. He writes a lot and his publisher loves to publish his work. For good reason, he produces some fantastic books. For this reason, it goes without saying that they'll want to keep publishing books by him, especially if they have a certain sense of guaranteed success. There's money in it after all. This applies across the board. A prequel wouldn't be published for the Hunger Games if it didn't make the publisher or the film industry money. Six of Crows might not have been teased as a trilogy instead of a duology if the Grishaverse in general hadn't proved to be popular. And the Percy Jackson series might not have gotten additional books if Disney hadn't jumped in to redo the TV series. So it's kind of clear, at least to me, that there are 3 main factors contributing to a series extension. 1, money. 2, fan pressure. And 3, the author wanted to do it. But what if, in this situation, the publisher wants more books, the fans want more books, but the author doesn't want to write them? The thing is, I can't find a lot of evidence of this, because even if an author really didn't want to write another book, but felt pressured to do so, I don't think they'd actually say. The publicity wouldn't exactly be good. However, what we do know is that Arthur Conan Doyle felt pressured to keep writing Sherlock Holmes stories by fans and his publishers. Supposedly, Anne Rice wanted to end the Vampire Chronicles after The Queen of the Damned, but due to its success and publisher interest, she carried on. I couldn't actually find any concrete evidence of this in interviews, but we all know how many clashes Anne has had with both the public and her publishers. Rice and Doyle were outspoken authors. They shared their thoughts on many occasions. Other authors, not so much. But you can bet there are plenty out there that thought a series was complete but extended due to external pressure, even if they eventually fell back in love with their books. So this leaves the question, can we trust the length of a book series or the status of a standalone? Or are we always going to have that possibility of more? For TJ Klune, that question has already been asked and now we know the answer. Let's just say when a publisher first starts talking about a new book, I don't think we can guarantee if it's actually going to be a standalone or a certain number in a series. As far as my research tells me, when negotiating a book contract, most only include the first book in a series. Any future books are under what's called the right of first refusal. This basically means you're giving your current publisher the first shot at bidding for your book before any other publisher. Essentially, you have to send it to them first. After that, based on the success of said first book, you may get a juicy 2 or 3 book deal afterwards to finish off the series. In the case of Emily Wilde's Encyclopedia of Fairies, which many fans couldn't tell would be a duology or a trilogy, the popularity of the first 2 books clearly gave the publishers encouragement to publish more. But it does feel a little like books and book series are being treated like Netflix series. Instead of knowing right from the get-go that books will have some sort of conclusion that we can expect at the time of announcement, they're extended as a surprise. It may not be quite as bad as Netflix dropping book fan favorites like Lockwood & Co. and Shadow and Bone, but it's still pretty annoying. Not devastating, not anger-inducing, but annoying. Because while I'm looking forward to reading Somewhere Beyond the Sea, I'm still a little miffed that when I finished reading The House in the Cerulean Sea, that wasn't it. That my closure, which is what I felt at the time, was a lie. But hey, I now want to know from you, are continued book series a good thing or a bad thing, or are you really not that bothered? Let me know in the comments and I will see you next time for another video.